In the dust-choked territory of 1873 Colorado, Sarah Whitmore's parents did the unthinkable. They didn't just cast her out, they didn't just disown her. They sold her. Like a lame horse or a broken plow, she was dragged to the Morrison trading post to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. Her crime? She was barren. In a world where a woman's worth was measured by the sons she could produce, Sarah was worth less than nothing. Her own father's knuckles rapped against the wagon side, a sound as final as a gavel. "Get out, girl. Time to meet your new owner." The words weren't just cruel, they were a death sentence to the life she knew. Sarah's bare feet hit the splintered floorboards, the shock of it traveling up her spine. Her hands, trembling, clutched a small cloth bag. It held everything she had left in the world. A worn dress, a tarnished locket, and a book of poems she knew by heart. Through a tear in the canvas wagon cover, she saw them. A circle of men, their faces a mix of pity, hunger, and cold calculation. They looked at her the way a butcher looks at a side of beef. She was just meat, just a commodity. "She looks healthy enough," a gravelly voice said. The heavy crunch of boots on dirt sounded like footsteps on a fresh grave. "But you say she can't have babies?" Sarah's father spat, the brown glob landing inches from her feet. 3 years married to Thomas Brennan. Not one child to show for it. Doctor says her insides are all wrong, but she can cook, clean, and read better than any man in this territory. She has her uses. The wind, sharp and cold, sliced through the canvas, making her shiver. She pressed her eye to the hole, scanning the faces. They were buzzards, all of them, circling, waiting to pick her apart. Some had mean, twisted mouths. Others had eyes that roamed over her body, making her feel unclean, stripped bare. But then she saw him. He was standing apart from the rest, a tall man with dark hair, and eyes so serious they seemed to hold the weight of the mountains behind him. His clothes were clean but worn, and his hands were the calloused, capable hands of a man who worked the earth. While the other men laughed and haggled over the price of damaged goods, he was silent. He just watched, a deep frown etched on his face, as if the whole spectacle was a personal insult to him. He wasn't looking at her like property. He was looking at her like a person. And that, in this place, at this moment, was the most dangerous thing of all. The tall man's voice cut through the others. "What's her name?" The question was so unexpected it silenced the entire group. Sarah's father blinked, thrown off his rhythm. Sarah Whitmore. What's it matter? She'll answer to whatever you call her." "It matters to me," the tall man said, his voice quiet but firm as granite. Sarah's heart didn't just skip a beat. It stopped. It completely stopped for a second, then kicked back to life with a painful jolt. Her name. No one had used her name in months. Her husband, Thomas, had called her woman. Her parents called her the burden. But this stranger wanted to know her name. "Can she speak for herself?" the tall man asked, his gaze fixed on the wagon. Now her father was just plain annoyed. "Of course she can speak. Too much, if you ask me. Always with the questions, always with the books. That's probably why her womb dried up. Too much thinking." The tall man ignored her father and took a step closer to the wagon, his shadow falling over the canvas. "Miss Sarah," he called, his voice gentle. "Would you come out here, please?" Please. The word was a forgotten language, a kindness so alien it felt like a trick. Sarah took a shaky breath, squared her shoulders, and pushed aside the canvas flap. The sudden sunlight was blinding. She blinked, and as her eyes adjusted, she saw them all staring. Some looked disappointed, as if she wasn't pretty enough to be worth the trouble. Others nodded, seeing a strong back for hard labor. But the tall man, he just looked sad, as if he understood her pain. "Miss Sarah," he said, his voice low and respectful. "My name is Samuel McCready. I have 5 children and a farm about 10 miles from here. My wife passed. I need help taking care of my family. Would you be willing to come work for us?" Work for them, not be owned by them? The idea was so radical, it barely made sense. Sarah looked at her father's face, now purple with rage at this breach of protocol. She looked at the other men, whispering and shaking their heads at Samuel's strange courtesy. Then she looked back into Samuel McCready's serious, sad eyes, and she saw something she hadn't seen in so long she'd forgotten it existed. She saw respect. "Yes, sir," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "I'd be willing." Samuel nodded once, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a roll of bills that made her father's eyes bulge with greed. It was more money than Sarah had ever seen in one place. He counted it out and handed it to her father, who snatched it like a starving dog. But Samuel wasn't finished. He turned back to her. "Do you have everything you need from the wagon?" Sarah held up her pathetic little bag. "This is everything." Samuel's frown deepened. "That's all? All your belongings?" Her father chimed in. "She doesn't need much. Never was one for fancy things." But Samuel wasn't looking at her father. His eyes were locked on hers. "Is there anything else you'd like to take? Anything at all that belongs to you?" Her mind flashed to her mother's old rocking chair, the one her father now used to prop up a broken fence post. She thought of the small herb garden she'd planted, now surely dead from neglect. She thought of the worn copy of Jane Eyre hidden under a loose floorboard, things that were hers in spirit but not in fact. "No, sir," she said, the words tasting like ash. "Nothing else belongs to me." Samuel studied her face for a long, agonizing moment. Then he did something that sent a shockwave through the crowd. He shrugged off his own thick wool coat, the one protecting him from the biting wind, and wrapped it around her thin shoulders. It was heavy and warm, and it smelled of pine smoke and clean earth. It smelled safe. "Well then," he said softly, his voice for her alone, "let's go home." As he led her toward his horse and wagon, her father's voice followed them, laced with spite. "She's your problem now, McCready. Don't come crying to me when she disappoints you like she disappointed everyone else." Sarah didn't look back. She couldn't. For the first time in 3 years, she was walking towards something, not being dragged away from it. The coat was a shield. The man beside her was a mystery, and as he helped her up into the wagon, she found her voice again. "Mr. McCready," she said. "Yes, Miss Sarah." "Thank you," she whispered, "for asking my name." For the first time, Samuel smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it reached his sad eyes and transformed his face. "Everyone deserves to be called by their name," he said. The wagon lurched forward, rolling away from the trading post, away from her father, away from the life that had tried to crush her. Sarah looked up at the vast, endless Colorado sky and allowed herself a tiny, terrifying flicker of hope. But what she didn't know was that Samuel McCready had a secret. He hadn't just bought a housekeeper. He was looking for something else entirely, something he hadn't told a soul, and his secret was about to put them all in grave danger. The ride to the McCready farm was a long, rattling silence. Sarah sat pressed against the far edge of the wagon seat, the heavy coat a strange comfort in a heavy burden. This man had paid a fortune for her, treated her with a bizarre kindness, but she knew better than to trust it. Kindness was a currency, and she had nothing left to pay with. She had been bought. The details were just window dressing. The silence stretched, filled only by the clip-clop of the horses and the whistle of the wind. She had to know. She had to understand the cage she'd just been moved to. "Your children," she said, the words startling even herself. "Tell me about them." Samuel seemed surprised she'd spoken. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Well, there's Jacob. He's 17. Thinks he's the man of the house now. He's a good boy, but he carries the weight of the world on his shoulders." Sarah knew that weight. She'd carried it herself. "Then there's Mary. She's 13, trying to be a mother to the others since Anna passed. She's smart as a whip and twice as stubborn." He paused, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "The twins, Ben and Beth, they're 10. Ben is quiet, loves animals more than people. Beth is a firecracker. Never stops talking, never stops moving." His voice softened, became fragile. "And then there's little Emma. She's 6. She barely remembers her mother, but she feels the empty space every single day." "They sound like good children," Sarah said, the words feeling inadequate. "They are," Samuel agreed, "but they need—" He stopped, searching for the right words. "They need a mother," Sarah finished for him, the statement flat and final. It was the one thing she could never be. Samuel shook his head, a sharp, decisive movement. No, he said, and the intensity in his voice made her look at him properly for the first time. They need more than that. They need a protector, someone who knows what it's like to be backed into a corner, someone who knows how to fight. He turned his gaze from the road to her, and his eyes weren't just sad anymore. They were searching. Anna used to say that children need to know they matter, not just for what they can do, but for who they are. They need to be seen. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. What if I disappoint them? The question screamed in her mind, but she refused to let it out. She had been nothing but a disappointment her whole life. Why should this be any different? Samuel looked at her, at the woman who had been discarded by everyone who should have loved her. Miss Sarah, I'm not expecting you to be Anna. I'm not expecting you to be perfect. I'm just hoping you'll care. His voice dropped lower. And I'm hoping you can be strong, stronger than anyone expects. The farm came into view as they crested a hill. It was nestled in a small valley, a sturdy log house with a plume of smoke rising from the stone chimney, a big red barn, and fences that were straight and true. It looked solid, permanent. But as they drew closer, Sarah saw 5 small faces pressed against the kitchen window, their expressions a mixture of raw curiosity and deep-seated fear. They'd lost their mother. Now their father was bringing home a stranger, a replacement. To them, she wasn't a savior. She was an invader. Are you ready? Samuel asked, his voice gentle again. Sarah took a deep breath, the cold air burning her lungs. She nodded, though she was anything but ready. As they walked toward the house, a sudden, high-pitched scream ripped through the air. It was a child's scream of pure terror. Sarah's head snapped up. The scream was coming from a massive oak tree behind the house. And that's when she saw it. A tiny figure, maybe 20 feet up, clinging to a branch for dear life. It was a little girl with blonde pigtails. Emma. She went up there chasing that darn cat. A girl's voice, Mary's, cried out in panic. Now she's too scared to come down. Papa's in the barn, yelled a teenage boy, Jacob. He won't hear us. The children were frantic, running in circles below the tree, their panic only making the little girl cry harder. Samuel started running, but he was too far away. Sarah didn't think. She acted. She dropped her small bag on the porch, kicked off her worn-out boots, and sprinted toward the tree. The bark was rough, with plenty of handholds. She'd climbed trees like this 100 times as a girl, escaping her father's rages. Miss Sarah, what are you doing? Mary gasped as Sarah leaped for the lowest branch and started hauling herself up. Getting your sister, Sarah called down, her muscles remembering the old rhythms. She moved quickly, efficiently, blocking out the shocked faces of the children below. She reached the branch where Emma was frozen, her small face streaked with tears and dirt. I can't get down, the little girl sobbed. It's too high. I know it's scary, Sarah said, her voice calm and steady, the voice she never knew she had. But I'm here now. I've got you. We'll go down together. What happened next was a miracle. The terrified child, who had never seen Sarah before in her life, uncurled her fingers from the branch and wrapped her little arms around Sarah's neck, holding on with the desperate strength of pure trust. For the first time in 3 long, empty years, Sarah felt the weight of a child in her arms, a child who needed her. It was a feeling so powerful it almost knocked her from the tree. Slowly, carefully, she guided them down, branch by branch, until their feet touched the soft earth. They stood there breathing heavily, Emma still clinging to her neck. The other 4 children just stared, their mouths hanging open. Samuel had come running from the barn and stood watching, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. How did you learn to do that? Ben asked, his eyes wide with awe. Sarah gently set Emma down, brushing bark from her own tattered skirt. My papa taught me, she said, a bitter irony in her voice. He said every girl should know how to rescue herself. Jacob stepped forward. He had his father's serious eyes, and they were studying her with a new, grudging respect. Thank you, he said stiffly. Most ladies would have just screamed for Papa. Sarah looked at the 5 children, at their relieved and bewildered faces. and a small, defiant smile touched her lips. "I'm not like most ladies," she said, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a curse. It felt like a promise. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah found a moment of peace on the front porch. The house was clean, the scent of fresh bread lingered in the air, and for a few hours the chaos had been replaced by a fragile order. Samuel came out and handed her a cup of coffee. "They've taken to you," he said. It wasn't a question. "They're good children," she replied, staring out at the dark mountains. "You've raised them well." "It hasn't been easy," he admitted, "but it's about to get harder. That's why I brought you here, Sarah." Sarah tensed. Here it was, the real reason. "What do you mean?" Samuel didn't look at her. He looked out at the darkness, as if seeing an enemy approaching. "The man you outbid at the trading post, Jake Thompson. He's not a good man. He wanted you, and he doesn't like losing. But it's more than that. My wife's sister, Henrietta Caldwell, she thinks she should be raising these children. She's been trying to prove I'm an unfit father ever since Anna died." He finally turned to her, and the sadness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Henrietta is a powerful woman in this community. She will use your presence here, an unmarried woman under my roof, as a weapon against me. She will try to take my children." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She wasn't just a housekeeper. She was a pawn in a much bigger, more dangerous game. "So you didn't bring me here just to cook and clean," she whispered. "No," Samuel said, his voice grim. "I brought you here because I heard the stories about you, about how you stood up to your husband, about how you endured what your father did. I brought you here because I need a fighter. Henrietta's coming, Sarah, and when she does, it's going to be a war, and you're standing right in the middle of it." The peaceful night suddenly felt menacing. The wind whispering through the pines sounded like a threat. Sarah had just escaped one prison, only to find herself on the front lines of a battle she hadn't known existed. A battle for 5 children she had only just met, and she was their only line of defense. The hammer blow landed 2 weeks later. It came in the form of a polished black buggy pulled by a perfectly groomed gray horse. The woman holding the reins sat ramrod straight, her face pinched into a permanent expression of disapproval. This was Henrietta Caldwell. She didn't just look like trouble, she radiated it like heat from a stove. Sarah was hanging laundry, the clean scent of lye soap a small comfort in her new life, when the buggy pulled up. The children, playing a game of tag in the yard, fell silent and scattered like quail, disappearing into the barn. They knew who this was. They knew what she represented. "Samuel McCready." Henrietta's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. She didn't wait for him to come out. She stepped down from the buggy, smoothing her expensive dress, and marched toward the house like a conquering general. "We need to have a word about this arrangement." Samuel emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He moved slowly, deliberately, a mountain of a man bracing for a storm. "Good morning, Henrietta. What brings you all the way out here?" "Don't you play the fool with me," she snapped, her eyes sweeping over the homestead before landing on Sarah. She looked Sarah up and down, and her lip curled in a tiny, venomous sneer. The look said everything. "You are trash. You are an inconvenience. You will be removed. The entire town is buzzing. You've brought this woman into your home, a barren woman your own family cast out, living here with my sister's children. It's a scandal of the highest order." Sarah's hands froze on a clothespin. Her knuckles were white. She wanted to run, to hide, to become invisible. But she could feel Jacob's eyes on her from the barn loft, Mary's from the kitchen window. They were watching. They were waiting to see what she would do. "Miss Sarah is my housekeeper," Samuel said, his voice a low rumble of warning. "Her past is her own. Here she is a valued member of my household." "Household?" Henrietta let out a short, barking laugh. "You call this a household? It's a den of impropriety. An unmarried man and woman, under one roof playing house. What kind of example is that for those poor, motherless children?" Just then, little Emma, who hadn't been fast enough to hide, peeked around the corner of the house. Her eyes were wide with fear. Seeing her chance, Henrietta softened her voice into a sickly sweet tone. Emma, darling, come here to your Aunt Henrietta. Emma shrank back, pressing herself against the log wall. Henrietta's face hardened again. You see, this woman has been here 2 weeks, and already they're turning away from their own blood. She's poisoning them against me. She is doing no such thing, came a voice from the porch. It was Mary. She stood there small and defiant, holding a wooden spoon like a weapon. Miss Sarah is kind. She sings to us. She helps me with the mending. She doesn't yell the way you do. Henrietta's head whipped around, her eyes blazing. You hold your tongue, young lady. You have no idea what is at stake here. I know you want to take us away, Mary shot back, her voice trembling but brave. You want to send us to that boarding school in Denver. Sarah's blood ran cold. That was the threat? To tear this family apart and ship the children off to strangers? Henrietta smiled, a cold, triumphant smile. They would receive a proper upbringing. They would be taught discipline and morality, things they are clearly not learning here. She turned her attention back to Samuel. I will not stand by and watch my sister's legacy be tarnished by this gutter trash you've dragged home. I have already spoken to Reverend Matthews. I have spoken to the sheriff, and I will be speaking to the circuit judge when he arrives next month. I will have them declared wards of a more suitable guardian. Me? It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration of war. Every word was a calculated blow, designed to break him, to make him surrender. Sarah saw the flicker of fear in Samuel's eyes, the fear of a father about to lose everything he loved. And in that moment, something inside Sarah snapped. The fear, the shame, the years of being told she was worthless, it all burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, cold rage. She dropped the laundry basket, walked across the yard, and stood directly between Henrietta and the house. She stood between the wolf and the lambs. You will not, Sarah said. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the air with absolute certainty. Henrietta looked at her, genuinely shocked that she had dared to speak. I beg your pardon? You will not threaten this family. You will not use these children as pawns in your game. You say you care about their morality? What is moral about trying to rip them from their home, from their father? You don't love them. You want to possess them, just like my husband and my father tried to possess me. She took another step forward. You think I'm weak because of where I came from. You are mistaken. I have survived men like my father. I have survived men like my husband. I will survive you. Henrietta was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She had expected a cowering, shamed creature. She was facing a lioness. This is not over, Henrietta finally hissed, gathering her dignity like a cloak. She spun around, marched back to her buggy, and climbed in. Mark my words, Samuel. The law's on the side of decency. You will lose them. With a sharp crack of the whip, the buggy tore down the path, leaving a cloud of dust and hatred in its wake. The yard was silent. The children slowly emerged from their hiding places, their eyes wide. They looked at Sarah, then at their father, then back at Sarah. She hadn't just rescued Emma from a tree. She had just faced down the dragon that haunted their nightmares. Samuel walked over to her, his face a mixture of awe and concern. Sarah, you didn't have to do that. Yes, she said, her body still humming with adrenaline. I did. She looked at the 5 children huddled together on the porch, their faces pale and frightened. They weren't just his children anymore. They were her responsibility, her charge. She's not going to take them, Sarah stated, not as a hope, but as a vow. I won't let her. That night, as a cold November wind rattled the windows, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Henrietta's threat. The law's on my side. In 1873, it probably was. An unmarried woman in the house could be all the proof a judge needed. They were vulnerable, terribly vulnerable. She crept out of her small room and went to the main room, needing the comfort of the dying fire. And that's when she saw it. Samuel was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. In front of him was a small locked wooden box. He was staring at it as if it held all the sorrows of the world. He didn't see her in the shadows. With a deep, shuddering sigh, he opened the box. He pulled out a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Sarah recognized the delicate handwriting immediately. They were Anna's letters, but he didn't read them. Instead, he reached back into the box and pulled out a small, folded piece of official-looking paper. He stared at it for a long, long time. Sarah could see a single tear trace a path down his weathered cheek and splash onto the table. What was that paper? What secret was he hiding that could make a man as strong as Samuel McCready weep in the dead of night? Sarah knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the answer to that question was the one thing that could either save them all or destroy them completely. The first snow came a week later, not as a gentle dusting, but as an invading army. A blizzard descended from the mountains with a furious howl, burying the world in a sea of white. The wind shrieked, piling drifts higher than the windows. On the second night of the storm, a sound like a cannon shot ripped through the house. A massive pine tree, weighted down with ice and snow, crashed to the ground, its branches scraping against the roof. It fell directly across their only path out, sealing them in. "We're trapped," Samuel announced, his voice grim after fighting his way back from the barn. "Could be a week, maybe more, before this clears enough for us to dig out." The small log house, once a cozy sanctuary, instantly became a pressure cooker. 7 people trapped in a confined space, with a dwindling supply of firewood, and the monstrous threat of Henrietta Caldwell hanging over their heads. The children felt the tension. Jacob grew more sullen, sharpening his hunting knife over and over. Mary became frantic, endlessly counting their jars of preserves. The twins bickered constantly, their energy having nowhere to go. Only little Emma seemed to find comfort, clinging to Sarah's side as if she were a human anchor. On the 4th day, the cabin fever was at its worst. A fight had broken out between the twins over a checkerboard, ending with pieces scattered across the floor. Jacob had snapped at Mary for burning the morning porridge. Samuel was just staring into the fire, lost in his own dark thoughts. The air was thick with anxiety and resentment. Sarah knew if something didn't change, they would tear each other apart long before the snow melted. She had to do something. She went to her small room and retrieved the one book she owned, her treasured copy of Jane Eyre. She came back to the main room and, in a clear, calm voice, said, "Gather round. I'm going to read you a story." The children looked at her, skeptical. Jacob scoffed. "We're too old for stories." "You're never too old for a good one," Sarah replied evenly. "It's about a girl who had no one, who was told she was worthless, but who refused to be broken." She looked directly at Jacob, then at Mary. "It's about a woman who finds a home in the most unexpected of places." She began to read. Her voice was steady, weaving a spell in the cramped, cold room. She read about Jane's miserable childhood, her defiance at Lowood School, her journey to Thornfield Hall. The children, one by one, were drawn in. The bickering stopped. Jacob put down his knife. Mary left her pantry worries. They sat on the floor, their faces illuminated by the firelight, completely captivated. They listened as Jane fell in love with the dark and brooding Mr. Rochester. They were enthralled. But as Sarah read, she noticed Samuel growing increasingly agitated. He shifted in his chair, his jaw tight, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. When she reached the part where Rochester's terrible secret is revealed, that he has a mad wife locked in the attic, Samuel abruptly stood up. "That's enough," he said, his voice harsh. The children stared at him, confused. "But Papa, it was getting to the good part," Beth whined. "I said that's enough reading for tonight," he repeated, his voice strained. He turned and went to his room, closing the door firmly behind him. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence. What had set him off? It was just a story. Later that night, long after the children were asleep, Sarah lay awake, troubled by Samuel's reaction. It was more than just a dislike for fiction. It was personal. The story had hit a nerve, a deep, painful one. The secret, the wife in the attic. She thought of the locked box. She thought of the paper that had made him cry. An awful, chilling idea began to form in her mind. What if Anna, his sainted, perfect, deceased wife, wasn't the woman everyone thought she was? What if Samuel had his own wife hidden in the attic? The thought was absurd, mad, but the pieces fit in a terrifying way. His desperate need for a fighter, his strange reaction to the story, his deep, ever-present sorrow that seemed to go beyond simple grief. Was it possible? Was he hiding something that monstrous? Driven by a need she couldn't explain, Sarah slipped out of bed. The house was dead quiet except for the howl of the wind. She crept to his bedroom door and listened. Nothing. She slowly, carefully turned the knob. The door swung open with a low creak. The room was empty. Samuel wasn't there. A wave of panic washed over her. Where could he have gone in a blizzard? Then she heard it, a faint sound coming from above, a floorboard creaking in the attic. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane, but she had to know. She moved to the small square hatch in the ceiling of the main room. A simple wooden ladder led up into the darkness. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely get a grip on the rungs. She pulled herself up, her head and shoulders emerging into the freezing, dusty space. The attic was filled with forgotten things. Old furniture, trunks, boxes. The wind moaned through the eaves. And there, in the far corner, holding a flickering lantern, was Samuel. He was standing in front of a small makeshift room, boarded off from the rest of the attic. A room with a heavy, bolted door. He hadn't seen her. He was talking to the door, his voice a low, pleading murmur. I know it's hard, but you have to stay quiet. Just a little longer. For the children's sake. Please. A low moan came from behind the door. It was a woman's voice filled with a pain that was barely human. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. Her worst, most insane fear was true. He had a woman locked in the attic. Henrietta wasn't just a threat. She was right. Samuel was unfit. He was a monster. And Sarah and the 5 children were trapped in a house with him. The blizzard wasn't just a storm anymore. It was the wall of their prison. And the man who held the key was hiding a secret far more terrible than she could have ever imagined. Sarah's mind screamed at her to run, to climb back down the ladder and barricade herself in her room. But her feet were rooted to the spot, frozen by a horror so profound it defied logic. The moan from behind the door came again, followed by a series of soft, rhythmic thuds, like someone gently knocking their head against the wood. Samuel didn't notice her. He just slumped against the door, his shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, he whispered to the unseen person within. I'm so sorry for all of this. This wasn't the behavior of a jailer. It was the grief of a heartbroken man. Something was terribly wrong with the picture. The monster she had imagined wasn't standing before her. A man in agony was. Stealing every nerve in her body, Sarah took a step forward. The floorboard groaned under her weight. Samuel spun around, his face a mask of pure terror, as the lantern light fell on her. He looked like a man who had been caught committing a murder. Sarah, he breathed, his voice ragged. You shouldn't be up here. Who is in that room, Samuel? She asked, her own voice a harsh whisper. What have you done? He looked from her to the bolted door, his expression crumbling into utter despair. He knew. He knew the secret was out. It's not what you think, he stammered, his defenses collapsing. Please, just go back downstairs. We'll talk in the morning. No, Sarah said, finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. We will talk now. You brought me into this house, into this fight for your children. I deserve to know what kind of man I'm standing with. Are you the man Henrietta says you are? The challenge in her voice seemed to drain the fight out of him. He leaned back against the wall, the lantern light casting deep, haunted shadows on his face. Her name is Elodie, he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. She was Anna's twin sister. The twist was so unexpected, Sarah could only stare. Anna's twin sister? What is she doing here? Locked in your attic? She's not locked in, Samuel said, his voice thick with pain. She's quarantined. She has consumption, the wasting sickness. It's in the final stages. The doctor in Denver said there was nothing to be done but to make her comfortable and keep her away from the children. The cough, if they catch the cough, he couldn't finish. He didn't have to. Consumption was a death sentence, and it was notoriously contagious. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The secrecy, the sorrow that was deeper than grief. The bolted door wasn't to keep a monster in. It was to keep a deadly disease from getting out. Anna made me promise, Samuel continued, his gaze distant. Elodie came to us a year ago, already sick. Anna insisted we care for her. Her own family had cast her out, afraid of the illness. Anna wouldn't do it. But then Anna got sick herself. A fever after Emma was born. It took her in 3 days. My last promise to my wife was that I would look after her sister, that I would not let her die alone in an institution. He looked at Sarah, his eyes pleading for understanding. Henrietta knows about Elodie. She's our sister-in-law too, but she sees Elodie as a shame, a weakness. She told me to send her away, to a sanatorium. She said if I didn't, she would use Elodie's presence to prove I was endangering the children, that I was keeping sickness and insanity under my roof. The full, monstrous weight of the situation crashed down on Sarah. Samuel wasn't a monster. He was a man trapped by 2 impossible promises, one to his dying wife to protect her sister, and one to his children to protect them. Henrietta wasn't just trying to take the children for propriety's sake. She was using a dying woman's illness as blackmail. The paper, Sarah whispered, remembering the document in the wooden box, the one that made you cry. Samuel nodded, his face etched with shame. It's a court order. Henrietta had it drawn up. It gives her temporary guardianship of the children if my home is ever deemed unsafe. All it needs is a judge's signature. The threat of exposing Elodie, that's the weapon she holds over my head. She knows the moment a judge hears there is a consumptive woman in the house, he'll sign it without a second thought. He had been living with this alone for 2 years, bearing the weight of his wife's death, 5 grieving children, and a secret that could cost him everything. He hadn't brought Sarah here to be a housekeeper or even a fighter. He had brought her here because he was drowning and needed someone, anyone, to help him keep his head above water before the flood came. Just then, a weak, rasping cough came from behind the door. It was a terrible liquid sound, the sound of lungs giving up. Samuel flinched as if he'd been struck. Sarah looked at the door, then back at the broken man before her. The fear and suspicion she'd felt moments ago were gone, replaced by a wave of fierce, protective compassion. She finally understood. She understood his desperation at the trading post, his search for someone strong. She understood his pain, and she knew what she had to do. She walked past him and stood before the bolted door. "What are you doing?" Samuel asked, his voice sharp with alarm. "I'm not afraid of sickness," Sarah said calmly. "I nursed my own mother through the fever. I know how to be careful." She looked at him over her shoulder. "You've been carrying this burden alone for too long, Samuel. Let me help you." Before he could protest, she slid the heavy bolt back. The door creaked open. The room inside was small but clean, with a simple cot, a wash basin, and a single window looking out into the swirling snow. Lying on the cot was a woman so thin and pale she was almost translucent. She had Anna's face, but it was hollowed out by disease, her eyes burning with a feverish intensity. She looked at Sarah, her expression a mixture of fear and confusion. "It's all right, Elodie," Samuel said gently, moving to her side. "This is Sarah. She's a friend." Elodie's gaze shifted to Sarah, and her eyes, so much like Anna's must have been, searched Sarah's face. Sarah stepped into the room, leaving the door open behind her. She knelt by the cot. "I'm here to help," she said softly. The storm raged outside, a perfect reflection of the turmoil within the house. But in that small hidden room, something shifted. A secret shared is a burden halved. The truth, as terrifying as it was finally out in the open. But revealing the secret was one thing. Surviving its consequences was another entirely, because the blizzard would eventually end. And when it did, Henrietta Caldwell would be coming. And now she had a new, unexpected ally in her war against Samuel. A man from Sarah's past was riding toward Colorado, a man who had more reason than anyone to see Sarah Whitmore destroyed. Her husband, Thomas Brennan, was coming to get his property back. The blizzard broke on the 7th day. A fragile, watery sun appeared, turning the snow-covered landscape into a blinding sheet of diamonds. The world was beautiful and silent, but the peace was deceptive. Inside the McCready house, the shared secret had forged a new, unspoken alliance. Sarah, with Samuel's tearful gratitude, took over Elodie's care. She moved with a quiet efficiency, keeping the sick room meticulously clean, preparing broths, and simply sitting with the dying woman, reading to her from the book of poems she had brought in her bag. The children were not told the truth, only that a sick friend of their mother's was being cared for in the attic, and that they must, under no circumstances, go up there. They accepted it with the simple trust they had come to place in Sarah. The family that emerged from the snowbound house was different from the one that had entered. They were quieter, more united. Jacob watched Sarah with a look of profound respect. Mary, relieved of a burden she never knew her father carried, became more of a child again. A fragile hope began to grow in the house. Maybe, just maybe, they could weather this. That hope was shattered a month later. Sarah was in the garden, turning over the rich soil for spring planting, when she saw the two riders coming up the path. Her heart seized. She recognized one immediately, the angry, slumped shoulders of her father, Harold Whitmore. The man beside him sat tall and righteous in the saddle, his black coat and hat stark against the greening valley. When he took off his hat to wipe his brow, Sarah's stomach plummeted through the floor. It was Thomas Brennan, her husband. Sarah! Her father's voice was a whip crack. Stop this foolishness. Time to come home. The children came running, sensing the invasion. Jacob appeared on the porch, his hand instinctively going to the hunting rifle mounted by the door. Mary herded the younger ones behind her like a mother hen. Thomas dismounted, his polished boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. He looked around the homestead with a proprietary air, his gaze dismissing it as crude and beneath him. Then his eyes landed on Sarah, and the look in them was a terrifying cocktail of ownership and contempt. Sarah, he said, his voice flat and cold, the law in Kansas says our divorce was never finalized. My lawyer looked into it. You are still my wife. I've come to collect what belongs to me. She doesn't belong to anybody, Jacob growled, his voice a low threat. Thomas let out a short, ugly laugh. Stay out of this, boy. A woman belongs to her husband. It's God's law and man's law. I've been lenient. I let you run off, but my patience has run out. Samuel came out of the barn, drawn by the commotion. He moved with a coiled stillness, his eyes taking in the scene. The two men, Sarah's ashen face, the terror in his children's eyes. Gentlemen, he said, his voice deceptively calm, you're on my property. State your business and be on your way. My business, Thomas said, puffing out his chest, is with my wife, who you seem to be keeping. He pulled a sheaf of papers from his coat, a legal marriage certificate, and a letter from my attorney confirming our union is still valid. She's coming with me. Today. The lady makes her own choices, Samuel replied, his hand resting casually on the hilt of the large knife on his belt. Her choices? Thomas sneered. She is barren. She has no worth beyond her duties as a wife. Duties she has neglected. He took a step towards Sarah. I'm willing to overlook your lapse in judgment. I'll take you back. You should be grateful. The insult, so public, so cruel, was like a physical blow. All the old shame, the feeling of being broken and worthless, washed over Sarah. She felt herself shrink. But then Emma's small hand slipped into hers. Mary moved to stand at her other side. Jacob stepped off the porch, placing himself between Sarah and Thomas. You're wrong, Emma said, her 6-year-old voice ringing with clarity. She's not broken. She takes care of us. She's our Mama Sarah, Mary added, her chin held high. And she's not going anywhere. Thomas's face darkened with rage. Children should be seen and not... No! The word that came out of Sarah's mouth was quiet, but it was as solid and unmovable as the mountains. Thomas stared at her, dumbfounded. What did you say? I said no, Sarah repeated, her voice gaining strength. She looked him directly in the eye, the fear dissolving into a white-hot anger. I am not your property, Thomas. I am not a broken tool you can discard and then reclaim when it suits you. You threw me away. You publicly shamed me. You convinced me I was worthless. But you were wrong. She gestured to the children, to Samuel, to the home around her. I have a family now, a real one that values me for who I am, not for what my body can or cannot do. I am not going with you. Not now. Not ever. Her father exploded. You ungrateful girl, after he's willing to take you back. Take me back for what? Sarah shot back, turning her fury on him. So you can sell me again when he gets tired of me? Was that the deal you two made? Her father's shocked silence was all the confirmation she needed. Thomas, realizing he was losing control, took a menacing step forward. You will come with me, or I will have the sheriff drag you out of here. But before he could take another step, Samuel was there, moving with a speed that was shocking in such a large man. He didn't draw his knife. He didn't raise his voice. He simply placed himself in front of Sarah, a human wall. She said no, Samuel said, his voice a low, deadly growl. You will respect her choice. You will get on your horse, and you will leave my land, now. Thomas was no coward, but something in Samuel's eyes made him hesitate. He looked from Samuel's implacable face to the defiant woman behind him, and then to the 5 children standing united with her. He was outnumbered, not by force, but by something far more powerful. Love. But Thomas Brennan was not a man who gave up. A venomous smile spread across his face. This isn't over, McCready. You may have won this little skirmish, but I'll win the war. He turned his cruel gaze on Sarah. I've been speaking with a Mrs. Henrietta Caldwell, a very reputable woman. She's told me some interesting things about the state of this household, about a certain sickness you're hiding. The blood drained from Samuel's face. Sarah felt a cold dread grip her heart. He knew. Henrietta had betrayed them all. She had armed their worst enemy with their most dangerous secret. The circuit judge arrives in Cedar Ridge in 2 weeks, Thomas continued, savoring his victory. We're going to have a proper hearing, custody of the children, my marital rights, and the matter of a public health hazard. When I'm through, you'll be ruined, McCready. And you, he said, pointing a finger at Sarah, will be begging me to take you back, because you'll have nowhere else to go. He and her father mounted their horses and rode away, leaving a toxic silence behind them. The battle wasn't just coming anymore. It was here, and they were about to face it on 2 fronts. Thomas wanted his wife back. Henrietta wanted the children. And they were using the most vulnerable person in the household, a dying woman, as the weapon to destroy them all. Sarah looked at Samuel, and in his eyes she saw the terrifying truth. They were going to lose. By the law of the land, they were going to lose everything. The 2 weeks leading up to the judge's arrival were a slow-motion nightmare. The news that Thomas Brennan had joined forces with Henrietta Caldwell spread through the valley like a disease. Neighbors who had once been friendly now averted their eyes. Whispers followed Sarah when she went to the general store. The McCready family was suddenly an island, isolated by scandal and fear. The threat was no longer a vague possibility. It was a date on a calendar. Judge Thompson was known as a hard man, a stickler for the law and traditional morality. He would see an adulterous arrangement, endangered children, and a hidden consumptive. He would see exactly the picture Henrietta and Thomas wanted him to see. Despair settled over the household like a thick fog. Samuel grew quiet and withdrawn, spending long hours in the barn, his face a mask of grim resignation. He was preparing to lose his children. Sarah's heart ached for him, for the children, for Elodie, who seemed to be fading faster as the tension in the house grew. One evening, Sarah found Jacob in the barn, furiously chopping firewood, his axe strokes landing with a desperate, angry rhythm. It's not fair, he seethed, not pausing in his work. They're lying about you. They're lying about Papa. The law doesn't always care about the truth, Jacob, Sarah said softly. It cares about what can be proven. Then we have to prove it, he said, stopping to look at her, his young face set with a fierce determination she recognized in his father. We have to fight back. His words sparked something in Sarah. For 2 weeks, they had been passive, waiting for the axe to fall. They had accepted defeat. But Jacob was right. She had told Henrietta she was a survivor. It was time to prove it. You're right, she said, but we can't fight them on their terms. We have to change the battlefield. An idea, wild and dangerous, began to form in her mind. It was a gamble of the highest order, one that could backfire spectacularly. But it was better than doing nothing. The next morning, she put her plan into motion. She sent Jacob on a secret errand, a long ride to the next county with a carefully written letter. Then she went to the attic. Elodie was weak, her breathing shallow, but her mind was still sharp. Elodie, Sarah began, her heart pounding, I am going to ask you for something. It is more than I have a right to ask, but it may be the only way to save these children. She explained her desperate plan. Elodie listened, her fever-bright eyes never leaving Sarah's face. When Sarah was finished, a faint, sad smile touched the dying woman's lips. Anna loved those children more than life itself, Elodie whispered, her voice a reedy thread. I will do anything to protect them. Tell me what I must do. The day of the hearing arrived, gray and cold. The community hall in Cedar Ridge was packed. It seemed the entire county had turned out for the spectacle. Henrietta and Thomas sat at the front, looking confident and righteous. Sarah sat with Samuel, the children huddled between them, their small faces pale with fear. Judge Thompson entered, a stern, white-haired man whose face looked like it had been carved from granite. He read the petitions aloud. Thomas Brennan's for the return of his wife, and Henrietta Caldwell's for the custody of the McCready children, citing an unfit and dangerous home environment. Mrs. Caldwell, the judge began, please state your case. Henrietta rose, a picture of bereaved concern. She spoke of her deep love for her departed sister, her fears for her nieces and nephews. She painted a picture of Samuel as a broken man, incapable of properly caring for his children, who had fallen under the influence of a woman of low moral character. Then she played her trump card. And Your Honor, she said, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper, there is the matter of the sickness. He is knowingly harboring a consumptive woman in the same house as those 5 innocent children. He is risking their very lives. A collective gasp went through the room. The judge's eyes narrowed, his gaze fixing on Samuel with cold disapproval. Mr. McCready, is this accusation true? Before Samuel could answer, Sarah stood up. It is true, Your Honor. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Henrietta smiled, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She admits it. But, Sarah continued, her voice ringing out, silencing the room, it is not the whole truth. She turned to face the crowd, to face the neighbors who had shunned her. The woman upstairs is Elodie, my husband Samuel's sister-in-law. We are caring for her because she is dying, and her own family, including Mrs. Caldwell, threw her out, wanting her to die alone. My husband, she said, her voice thick with emotion, is not a reckless man. He is a good man, trying to honor a promise to his dead wife. We have kept Elodie isolated. We have protected the children. The only person who has endangered them is Mrs. Caldwell by using a dying woman's tragedy as a weapon. The judge looked intrigued but skeptical. Be that as it may, the risk remains. And what of my risk? Thomas Brennan shouted, jumping to his feet. This woman is my wife. She abandoned her sacred vows. Did she abandon them? Sarah shot back, spinning to face him. Or did you drive her away? Did you not tell the entire town of Lawrence that I was a worthless, barren creature? Did you not have me delivered to my father, who then sold me for $80? Is that how a man honors his sacred vows? The room was utterly silent. Thomas's face was beet red. He had been publicly shamed. Your Honor, Sarah said, turning back to the judge, Mr. Brennan doesn't want a wife. He wants property. And Mrs. Caldwell doesn't want to protect the children. She wants to possess them. This is not about law or morality. It is about greed and control. These are serious accusations, Miss Whitmore, the judge said, his tone severe. Do you have any proof? As a matter of fact, Sarah said, her heart hammering, I do. She looked toward the back of the hall. Jacob? The doors opened. Jacob walked in, but he was not alone. Beside him was a frail, older man and a young woman with a bruised face and terrified eyes. Sarah recognized her from her old life in Kansas. She was the girl who had worked at the mercantile. This is Dr. Adams and Miss Clara, Jacob announced. They rode all the way from Lawrence. Thomas Brennan's face went white as a sheet. Dr. Adams stepped forward. Your Honor, I was the doctor who examined Sarah Brennan 3 years ago. I never told her or her husband that she was barren. I said it was unexplained, and that sometimes these things just take time. Mr. Brennan is the one who twisted my words, who started the rumor that she was broken. Then Clara, the young woman, stepped forward, her voice trembling. Your Honor, I, I worked for Mr. Brennan. After Sarah left, he, he promised me marriage. But he has a cruel temper, sir, especially when he drinks. She pointed a shaking finger at Thomas. He is not a good man. He is a violent man. The room was in an uproar. Thomas looked like a trapped animal, but the judge slammed his gavel down. Order! This is compelling testimony, but it does not change the matter of the marriage contract, nor the consumptive woman. He looked at Samuel. Mr. McCready, I am inclined to grant Mrs. Caldwell's petition. The children's safety must be my primary concern. This was it. They had lost. Sarah felt Samuel's hand find hers under the table, his grip a final, desperate comfort. But the back door opened one more time, and every head in the room turned. A figure stood there, wrapped in a heavy blanket, leaning on the arm of the town's own Dr. Harrison. The figure was gaunt and weak, but her eyes burned with a feverish light. It was Elodie. Your Honor, she said, her voice a rasping whisper that somehow carried through the entire hall. May a dying woman speak? The judge, stunned, could only nod. Leaning on the doctor, Elodie slowly made her way to the front of the room. She stood before her sister Henrietta, whose face was a mask of horror and disbelief. Henrietta, Elodie rasped, you were always so concerned with appearances, with what was proper. But you were never concerned with what was right. When I got sick, you told me I was a disgrace, an embarrassment. You told me to go away and die where no one could see me. She then turned to Samuel. But this man, my sister's husband, he took me in. He and this woman, she gestured to Sarah, have cared for me. They have shown me more kindness in my last days than you have shown me in my entire life. She took a ragged breath, gathering her last reserves of strength. You want to know what an unsafe home is, Your Honor? It is a home without compassion. It is a home without love. My sister Anna's children are not in danger from sickness. They are in danger from this woman's cold, merciless heart. With that, Elodie's strength gave out. She collapsed and Dr. Harrison caught her. The room was pandemonium. Judge Thompson stared at the scene, his stern face unreadable. He had heard the law. He had heard the testimony, but he had just seen the raw, undeniable truth. He had seen the difference between a family forged in love and a bond built on legal paper and cold ambition. The fight was over, but no one knew who had won. Judge Thompson's gavel crashed down again and again, the sound echoing the frantic beating of Sarah's heart. Order! Order in this hall! He bellowed, his face a thundercloud. Dr. Harrison, with Jacob's help, was gently carrying the unconscious Elodie out a side door to a waiting wagon. The community was in an uproar, shouting, pointing, the veneer of civility stripped away to reveal the raw passions beneath. Henrietta Caldwell stood frozen, her face ashen. Thomas Brennan was already trying to slink toward the exit, but two burly farmers moved to block his path. Silence! The judge roared. And this time, the room obeyed. He fixed his hard gaze on Henrietta. Mrs. Caldwell, for years you have presented yourself as the moral compass of this community. Yet today I have heard testimony that you would abandon your own dying sister and use her suffering as a tool for your own ambition. Is there anything you wish to say? Henrietta drew herself up, a last shred of her arrogant dignity clinging to her. I was only thinking of the children's welfare. It is not proper. Proper? The judge interrupted, his voice dripping with scorn. Madam, there is nothing proper about cruelty. Your petition for custody is denied, emphatically. I suggest you go home and reflect on the true meaning of family. He waved a dismissive hand. You are excused. Henrietta stood for a moment, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The entire town was staring at her, their eyes filled not with respect, but with contempt. Her reputation, the thing she valued above all else, had been utterly destroyed in a matter of minutes. She turned, her back ramrod straight, and marched out of the hall, a queen dethroned. Then the judge turned his formidable gaze to Thomas Brennan. Mr. Brennan, you have come before this court claiming the rights of a husband, But the testimony I have heard today paints a picture not of a husband, but of a tyrant and a fraud. You publicly shamed your wife based on false medical claims. You conspired to sell her. You have a documented history of violence. He picked up the Kansas marriage certificate from his desk, holding it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a piece of garbage. In the Colorado territory, a legal contract requires good faith from both parties. You have demonstrated nothing but bad faith. Furthermore, under territorial law, abandonment is grounds for divorce. By your own admission, you cast this woman out. Therefore, this court declares your marriage to Sarah Whitmore null and void. He didn't stop there. Furthermore, I am fining you $100 for filing a frivolous and malicious claim before this court, and another $100 for the emotional distress caused to Mrs. He paused, looking directly at Sarah. To Miss Whitmore. You will pay these fines to the court, and you have 24 hours to be out of this county. If you are seen here again, you will be arrested for contempt. Gasps rippled through the hall. This wasn't just a ruling. It was a reckoning. Thomas Brennan, who had walked in as the righteous plaintiff, was being run out of town in disgrace. He stared at the judge, speechless with rage. But the two farmers took a step closer, and the fight drained out of him. He turned and fled. Finally, the judge looked at Samuel and Sarah, and for the first time, the granite harshness of his face softened. Mr. McCready, Miss Whitmore, you have a complicated household, an unconventional one. By the letter of the law, I have grounds to intervene. He let the words hang in the air, a final, terrifying pause. But the law, in its wisdom, also allows for judicial discretion. And what I have seen today, what I have witnessed, is not a broken home, but a home that has been forged in the fires of adversity. I have seen a father's love, a woman's courage, and the fierce loyalty of children. He looked down at his desk, then back up at them. Your family is your own business. The court will not interfere. He banged the gavel one last time, the sound final and absolute. This hearing is adjourned. It was over. They had won. An explosion of cheers and applause erupted from the crowd. Neighbors who had shunned them were now rushing forward, slapping Samuel on the back, shaking Sarah's hand. Mrs. Patterson, the mill owner's wife, hugged her tightly. We knew you were good people, she whispered. We were just afraid to say it. Amid the celebration, Sarah looked for the children. They were huddled together, their faces a mess of tears and radiant smiles. Emma broke free and ran to Sarah, throwing her arms around her waist. You did it, Mama Sarah! You saved us! The word Mama echoed in the hall, and this time, no one whispered or judged. It just felt right. They returned home as the sun was setting, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple. The farm had never looked so beautiful, so peaceful. It was truly theirs now, safe and secure. Dr. Harrison met them on the porch. His face was somber. Elodie? Samuel asked, his voice thick with dread. She's resting, the doctor said gently. The excitement, it was too much for her. She's peaceful, but she's weak. She's asking for you, Sarah. Sarah went up to the small attic room. Elodie was lying still, her breathing barely a whisper, but her eyes were open and clear. She managed a small, weak smile as Sarah entered. Did we win? She breathed. Sarah knelt by the bed and took her frail hand. We won, Sarah said, her voice choked with tears. You saved them, Elodie. Your courage saved them all. No, Elodie whispered, her gaze drifting toward the window, toward the last light of day. Love saved them. Always does. Her eyes closed, and with a final, gentle sigh, she was gone. 6 months later, on a bright spring morning, Sarah stood in her flourishing garden. Emma, her arm long since healed and strong, chased butterflies through the rows of vegetables. The twins were helping Jacob build a new chicken coop, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Mary was on the porch, practicing a song on a guitar Samuel had bought her. The land was theirs. The family was whole. And Sarah was no longer Sarah Whitmore, the discarded woman. She was Sarah McCready. Samuel came and stood beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. They had been married by the Reverend Matthews a month after the hearing, a quiet ceremony with just the children as witnesses. What are you thinking about? He asked softly. About how a life can break, she said, leaning her head against his shoulder, and how it can be put back together, stronger than before. Not the same, but stronger. She thought of Elodie's sacrifice, of Jacob's courage, of a community that had learned to choose compassion over convention. She thought of the 5 children who had taught her how to be a mother, and the man who had shown her she was worthy of love. Mama Sarah, Emma called, running to them with a handful of wildflowers. I picked these for you. Sarah took the flowers, a vibrant bouquet of blue and yellow and white. She looked from the flowers to the faces of her family, to the man she loved, to the home they had built together against all odds. Her father had sold her for $80 because he thought she was worthless. He was wrong. Her worth wasn't something to be bought or sold. It was something she had forged herself every day, through love, through courage, and through the stubborn, beautiful refusal to be broken. The wind that had once carried the sounds of her sorrow now carried the sounds of her children's laughter, and it was the sweetest sound in the world. This story is a powerful reminder that family is not always about the blood you share, but about the love you give and the choices you make. If you were moved by Sarah's journey from a broken woman to the heart of a loving family, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories of survival and redemption. And let us know in the comments below. What do you think truly defines a family? We'd love to hear your thoughts.